"If you love me, kill my parents." This isn't a movie line or a dramatic soap opera quote. It's essentially what Johanna Möller told a young man she was involved with. This story is real. It's about manipulation, obsession, perversion, and a distorted kind of love used as a weapon of destruction. Imagine someone you love deeply asking you to do the unthinkable, something so brutal it defies all morality. In 2016, in the quiet town of Arboga, Sweden, a crime shocked the entire nation. A father was brutally murdered in the middle of the night. The mother, stabbed multiple times, miraculously survived. The crime scene looked like a nightmare. But what was most terrifying came after. The couple's own daughter, Johanna, was behind it all. Why? How? What drives someone to turn love into emotional blackmail and desire into deadly manipulation? In this video, you'll dive into the mind of a woman who exuded charm but hid a dangerous, dark side. We'll reveal the details of the crime, Johanna's psychological profile, her influence over her young boyfriend, and what truly happened then. Brace yourself, because when love becomes a weapon, no one is safe. Before we dive deeper into the case, we need to understand who Johanna Möller really was. She wasn't just a woman with bad intentions. Johanna exhibited clear traits of a malignant narcissistic personality, a type of psychological behavior as seductive as it is destructive. This profile goes far beyond an inflated ego. We're talking about individuals who craft a charming, friendly, even charismatic image. But behind the mask lies an insatiable need to control, manipulate, and destroy. The malignant narcissist doesn't act on impulse. They carefully choose their victims, usually emotionally vulnerable people starved for affection or going through fragile time. And what's even more disturbing, these people are experts at making their victims believe everything happening is their own fault. In a relationship with a malignant narcissist, the victim lives in constant emotional instability, always trying to please, avoid conflict, apologizing even when they did nothing wrong. Meanwhile, the abuser maintains complete control, switching between affection and emotional punishment to assert dominance. In Johanna's case, this pattern is evident from the start. She knew how to seduce, not just physically, but emotionally. She had the aura of a victim, a misunderstood woman, someone rejected by the world, and that made her incredibly convincing. She made people around her feel pity, compassion, and later guilt. When she met Mohammed Rajabi, an 18-year-old Afghan refugee, she saw the perfect prey, someone lonely, far from home, emotionally unstable, and desperate for connection. The trap was set. Johanna began filling the emotional void Mohammed with attention, affection, promises, and above all, emotional dependency. She became everything to him. And when someone becomes your everything, they can also become your prison. Johanna convinced him that the world was against him, that her parents were a threat, that he'd be deported, that there was only one way to stay together, eliminate the obstacle. That's the core of the malignant narcissist. They don't need to strike. They use words, seduction, love, fear, all as weapons. They manipulate with praise and destroy with silence. They build a world where only their voice matters. They create the problem, offer the solution, and then make you pay emotionally, psychologically, sometimes in blood. With Johanna, all of this played out in her charm wasn't affection, it was control. Her sweetness wasn't care, it was a trap. And into that emotional battlefield walked Mohammed, unaware that the enemy smiled at him every day. In the early hours of August 22, 2016, silence at the Möller family's summer home was shattered. That night, there were no cries for help heard in time, only the cold unfolding of a premeditated plan. And Johanna Möller had convinced Mohammed that her parents were a real threat. She filled him with fear, insecurity, and a twisted sense of purpose, to protect their love at all costs. They brought Mohammed to Arboga with a mission he never imagined he'd accept, to kill his girlfriend's parents. Arriving at the house, while Johanna waited outside, Mohammed, it was the middle of the night. Bengt and Anki were asleep upstairs, unaware that the night would end in horror. Mohammed slowly climbed the stairs, knife in hand, sweating, heart racing, mind clouded with confusion. He entered the bedroom and struck Bengt Möller, the father, first, multiple swift, brutal blows. Bengt had no time to react. Anki woke up from the noise. She tried to get up, screamed, but was also attacked. She was stabbed several times, but miraculously survived. Despite her critical condition, she managed to escape and call for help. Anki changed everything because she lived, because she spoke. And what she told the police in the hospital cut through the darkness like lightning. I feel it was my daughter, Johanna. She wanted us dead. The police arrived and found Bengt dead in bed. The scene was chaotic. Blood everywhere, signs of struggle, and a clearly premeditated attempt at murder. At first, no one believed Johanna could be involved. She cried, panicked, claimed to be in shock. But slowly the mask began to fall. Muhammad was located days later. He was terrified. In his first statement, he claimed he acted alone. But the police already had their suspicions. Then came the messages. Text exchanges between Johanna and Muhammad. Some deleted, others recovered, revealed the level of mutilation. She said things like, "You know we have no choice. If they disappear, nothing can separate us. You'd do this for me, wouldn't you?" This wasn't just complicity. It was emotional and mental incitement. Johanna guided every step from planning to execution. She cried for the cameras. She organized her father's funeral with an almost convincing expression of grief. She spoke to the press with a trembling voice, claiming to be devastated. But behind the scenes, she was trying to influence Muhammad's testimony, telling him what to say or not say. When the police confronted her with the messages, Johanna replied with a rehearsed excuse. "He made me write that. I was scared. I'm not responsible." But no one bought it. The evidence was overwhelming. The manipulation pattern was undeniable. Johanna had planned the murder, lured a vulnerable young man into killing, and tried to cover her tracks with an Oscar-worthy performance. The case made headlines in Sweden and beyond. The brutality of the murder, orchestrated by a daughter against her own parents, and the use of love as a weapon. It all made this story uniquely disturbing. The Arboga crime became a warning to the world about the destructive power of emotional manipulation and how, sometimes, the real monster can live inside your own. To understand how someone reaches the point of plotting their own parents' murder, we have to look back long before the crime. Johanna Möller was born in 1975 in Västerås, a mid-sized Swedish city. She grew up in a traditional, secure home. Her parents, Bengt and Anki, were respected and active in the community. Bengt was an engineer and Anki a teacher. The family had a solid reputation, strong values, and high expectations. Johanna was the eldest daughter. From an early age, she showed charisma, intelligence, and social magnetism. She knew how to attract attention, earn praise, be noticed. But behind that image, childhood accounts point to a personality that blended ambition with early manipulation. Johanna knew how to lie her way out of trouble. She knew how to use words to her advantage. And over time, she developed a disturbing skill, convincing those around her to believe her stories, even when they were clearly false. During her teen years, she began to drift from her family's values. She engaged in social circles where she was admired, but also began testing risky behavior. Intense relationships, power games, small scams. She loved being the center of attention. And when she wasn't, she created situations to become it. She couldn't stand being sidelined. She was obsessed with control, emotional, social, symbolic. And over time, this turned into a constant need for validation. Eventually, she earned a degree in social work and began working with immigrants and vulnerable individuals. Ironically, the same kind of people who would later become her psychological. Professionally, she was seen as committed, but often caused conflicts due to her authoritarian demeanor and interpersonal clashes. Colleagues reported Johanna as highly controlling and unable to take criticism. She would form quick alliances, but end them just as fast whenever she felt opposed. What's most striking about Johanna's story is how well she knew how to adapt her image depending on the setting. To her family, she was the daughter seeking reconciliation. To her friends, a modern and misunderstood woman. At work, she was the savior of the excluded. But in all of these roles, one thing was constant. Johanna was always the center, the star, the victim, or the hero. Everything revolved around her. And when reality didn't match her narrative, she simply reshaped or destroyed. It's in this context that we begin to see the seed of what would later turn fatal. A woman who refused limits, couldn't handle frustration, and viewed others merely as pieces in her personal. In 2015, Johanna Möller's life took another dark turn. That year, her then-husband, Aki Pasila, was found dead after a party with. Apparently, he had drowned in a lake. The case was initially treated as an accident. There were no clear signs of struggle, and Johanna told the police a coherent story. He had drunk too much, wandered off alone, and fallen into the water. But there were some murky details. Close acquaintances reported the relationship was unstable. Aki had confided that Johanna was manipulative and made him feel constantly guilty and inferior. Even more suspicious, just days before the supposed drowning, Johanna had taken out a life insurance policy worth hundreds of thousands of Swedish kronor. Coincidence? Maybe. But this detail would come back to haunt the case later. The investigation was superficial. No in-depth toxicology report was conducted, and due to lack of concrete evidence, the case was closed as an accidental death. Cleared of any official suspicion, Johanna moved on, and that's when she met Mohammed Rajabi. He was everything Aki wasn't: young, vulnerable, foreign, and completely dependent. An Afghan refugee newly arrived in Sweden, with no family, no support, no structure. Johanna met him during a refugee integration program. As a social worker, she had direct access to young people in vulnerable situations. And that's where she found Mohammed, an 18-year-old boy, shy, fragile, and in desperate need of protection. Their relationship developed rapidly. Within weeks, Mohammed was living with Johanna, caught in a romantic relationship marked by emotional intensity and dependency. She gave him clothes, electronics, comfort, and constantly made promises: "I'll help you stay in the country. We'll be together forever." The age difference, nearly 20 years, wasn't a problem. For Johanna, it meant control. She offered shelter, food, the promise of legal stability, protection from deportation. In return, she gained obedience, devotion, and blind love. Mohammed wasn't just a boyfriend. Little by little, he became an extension of her will. Johanna portrayed herself as the savior of a lost, but in reality, she was shaping her next pawn. The void left by Aki's death was quickly filled by a new narrative, one where she was once again the victim, the hero, and secretly the manipulator. The relationship between Johanna and Mohammed quickly crossed the boundaries of what could be considered healthy. Johanna assumed a dominant, almost maternal role, but one that was highly controlling. She decided what he wore, who he could speak to, when he could leave the house, and most importantly, what he should feel. Mohammed, already emotionally weakened by his refugee status, found not only shelter in her, but someone he saw as essential. To him, Johanna meant safety, even if that meant living under constant emotional blackmail. She would say things like, "If you leave me, no one will ever care about you. If you don't do what I say, you'll be deported." The manipulation was gradual but effective. Johanna invented problems, painted her parents as villains, and made Mohammed believe the world was. She positioned herself as his only ally, the only one who truly loved him. This kind of emotional isolation is common in abusive relationships, but with Johanna, it came with calculated precision. She also controlled the narrative external. To acquaintances, she claimed she was saving Mohammed from. To him, she said everyone, even her own family, wanted to destroy them. Over time, Mohammed started to believe he was fighting for a forbidden love, that he was a hero standing up to a prejudiced society and Johanna's hateful parents. All of it built by her. Messages between the two revealed how Johanna used praise, threats, and emotional manipulation to keep Mohammed under control. She oscillated between extreme sweetness and cruel detachment, a technique known as emotional intermittence, capable of creating deep psychological dependence. And it worked. Mohammed became more submissive. He no longer made decisions on his own. He couldn't imagine life outside of Johanna. In one of the audio recordings recovered by the police, she said, "They will never leave us alone. There's only one way out. If you love me, you know what to do." That phrase would echo as a forewarning of what was to come. The most alarming part was how quickly Johanna could emotionally destabilize them. She made him feel like the hero of a love story, when in truth, he was just a tool in a cruel plan. Every gesture, every word from her was calculated. It was as if she knew exactly which buttons to press to elicit blind obedience. Johanna never had to raise a hand. She had already planted the plan in Mohammed's mind. She didn't need to stain her hands with blood, but she's the one who put the knife into the story. The idea of killing Johanna's parents didn't appear out of nowhere. It was carefully planted, nurtured, and reinforced for weeks. Every conversation, every tear, every gesture, all part of a psychological setup aimed at one goal: murder. Johanna started slowly, saying her parents didn't respect her, that they were prejudiced and would never accept her relationship with Muhammad. She claimed they were plotting something against him, even suggesting they might report him to immigration authorities. For Muhammad, who lived in constant fear of deportation, that was a real threat, and Johanna knew it. Eventually, she began saying there was no other way, that if they wanted to be together, her parents had to get out of the way. She never used the word kill directly, but it was always implied that removing them was the only solution. Phrases like "they'll never leave us in peace" and "you do anything for me, right?" were common. She also created a sense of urgency, claimed her parents were planning to have her committed to a psychiatric hospital, said they controlled her life, her money, her freedom, and that he was the only person in the world who could save her. At the same time, she began preparing the logistics. She chose a location, the family summer house, a secluded place, rarely monitored, where her parents often spent time resting. She convinced Muhammad to go with her under the pretense of a reconciliation visit, but her real motive was to create the perfect opportunity. She brought a knife without explicitly saying why, said they might need to defend themselves, that her parents could get aggressive. Every detail was crafted to appear spontaneous, when in fact, it was all part of a premeditated plan. She even set up her own alibi, messages to friends, simulated phone calls, and conversations with her parents days before to appear close and innocent. Muhammad, crushed by emotional pressure, believed he was saving the love of his life. The seed was planted, the mind molded, the scene set. All that remained was the final act, and Johanna knew exactly when and how it would happen. August 22nd, 2016, seemed like just another day. Johanna and Muhammad arrived at the summer house under the excuse of spending time as a family. Bengt and Anki welcomed them, still suspicious, but willing to give a chance for civility. They had dinner together, talked, even shared a few light-hearted moments, but it was all a facade. Muhammad already knew what Johanna expected of him. Her look, their exchanged messages, the strategic silences, everything pointed to the moment. In the early hours, with her parents asleep, Johanna encouraged Muhammad to act. She said she was scared that they were going to do something, that this was the moment. She lay beside him, but didn't sleep. She waited, watched, and pushed him psychologically. Around 3 a.m., Muhammad got up silently. He took the knife Johanna had brought, walked to Bengt and Anki's bedroom. What followed was a quiet massacre. Bengt was attacked in his sleep. He had no chance. The blows were swift, brutal, and precise. Anki woke up and tried to intervene. She too was stabbed multiple times, but by some miracle, she survived. She escaped the house, bleeding, and sought help from a nearby neighbor. Even in shock, she managed to call the police. Muhammad, panicked, returned to Johanna and told her what had happened. She reacted with apparent surprise, but made no move to flee, no call for help, nothing. She simply said, "It's done now. We need to stay calm." When the police arrived, they found Bengt dead in bed and Anki being rushed to the hospital. Muhammad was arrested. Johanna was interrogated. She cried, claimed she didn't understand, insisted she was in shock. But investigators quickly realized something was wrong. Too much control, calculated answers, no real signs of panic. So they began to reconstruct what really happened then. It wasn't a crime of passion, nor a moment of madness. It was the execution of a meticulously crafted plan. And Johanna, though she didn't hold the knife, was clearly the one directing the stage. She pulled all the strings, and that night, she pulled them all. Johanna Möller survived. Gravely injured, she spent days in the ICU. But her strength and clarity were crucial to turning the case around. As soon as she was able to speak, even weakened, she gave a statement that changed the course of the investigation. She told the police, "I saw his face. It was Muhammad." But what hurt the most was knowing, deep down, that Johanna knew, that maybe she planned it all. Anki's words hit like an earthquake. Up until then, Johanna was seen as a grieving daughter. But her mother's own testimony cast deep doubt on that version. Investigators began to re-examine everything. The exchanged messages, the timeline of the night, the history between mother and daughter. And the deeper they dug, the more evidence surfaced, not just of complicity, but of premeditation. Anki became a central figure in the process. Her courage in accusing her own daughter was something extremely rare in family crime. She not only survived the physical attack, she emotionally withstood the pain of admitting her daughter's monstrosity. And it was that courage that allowed the truth to finally begin to surface. With Anki's testimony, the investigation took a new turn. Now, Johanna was not just a witness. She was a possible mastermind behind a brutal crime. Investigators began to scrutinize every detail of her life. Emails, conversations, call records, message histories. Then came the first clear evidence. Messages exchanged with Muhammad weeks before the crime, where she spoke about her parents as texts filled with emotional provocations and ambiguous phrases, when pieced together, painted a chilling narrative. One message read, "If they disappear, everything will be easier." Another, "I feel trapped. Only you can set me free." Additionally, police found that Johanna had searched the internet for things like how to get someone to commit a crime without being blamed and methods of emotional manipulation. These clues began completing the puzzle and showed that Johanna hadn't just known about the crime, she had orchestrated it. Police called Muhammad in for a new interrogation. This time, calmly, he revealed more about his life with Johanna, how she made him feel guilty for everything, how she threatened to kill herself if he left, how she emotionally cornered him until he lost all sense of reality, and finally, how she convinced him that the only way to save her was to eliminate her parents. That confession, combined with digital evidence, shattered Johanna's facade. The woman who cried on camera and organized her father's funeral was, in truth, the mind behind it all. When confronted by authorities, she tried to flip the narrative. She claimed Muhammad had threatened her, that he was the one seeking revenge. But her words no longer had the same power. What remained were facts, testimonies, and a trail of manipulations leading directly to the heart of the crime. Johanna's downfall was swift and intense. The woman who once portrayed herself as a savior, a victim, and a heroine, was now seen for what she truly was, a cold, calculated, and extremely dangerous strategist. The trial of Johanna Möller and Mohammad Rajabi drew national attention in Sweden. The courtroom was packed for every session. It was a dark spectacle, and everyone wanted to understand how a love story had turned into a brutal murder. Johanna pleaded not guilty. She said she never wanted her parents to die, that Muhammad was unstable, that she was the victim of a setup. But prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: messages, audio recordings, internet searches, and, most importantly, the testimonies of Muhammad and her own mother. Forensic psychiatrists were called to assess Johanna. Their reports revealed traits of narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative behavior, lack of empathy, and a high degree of deceitfulness. Everything confirmed the psychological profile outlined by the investigation. Muhammad, on the other hand, was described as emotionally vulnerable, impressionable, and psychologically dependent on Johanna. The prosecution demanded a harsh sentence for both, but Muhammad's defense argued he had been used, that he was unable to fully comprehend the consequences of his actions under such extreme influence. In the end, the court ruled Johanna Möller was sentenced to life in prison for murder and attempted murder. Mohammad Rajabi was initially sentenced to 1 year and 6 months in juvenile detention. A sentence later revised due to the gravity of the crime, though still reduced due to his emotional condition. The verdict was both a strong and symbolic response. It showed that even without holding the weapon, those who manipulate with words can be just as, or even more, dangerous. The Johanna Möller case gained international attention. Newspapers, documentaries, and TV shows began calling her the Black Widow of Sweden, a nickname that captured her image: seductive, enigmatic, and deadly. The media explored every angle: her relationship with a young refugee, the psychological manipulation, the use of love as a weapon, and the crime itself, committed against those who should have been most protected. It was a case that sparked deep debates about mental health, immigration, emotional abuse, and the role of justice when manipulation is as lethal as To this day, Johanna serves her sentence in a high-security prison in Sweden. She has never admitted guilt, never showed remorse. In the few interviews she has given, she maintains her innocence and tries to reinforce the narrative that she was a victim of circumstance. Meanwhile, Anki, the surviving mother, lives with the physical and emotional scars of a tragedy that destroyed her family. Today, she is one of the few voices still speaking publicly about the case, not out of revenge, but as a warning. As for Muhammad, he lives in seclusion, burdened by the crime he committed under intense manipulation. His youth was stolen by a relationship that looked like love, but was really control. This case leaves us with a painful but necessary lesson. There are people who use affection as a tool for power, who build relationships not to share, but to dominate. And when these relationships reach the extreme, the result can be total destruction. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who's interested in real stories that make us reflect on the complexity of human behavior. See you in the next episode.